to my very first Reflections video. This is on a game that I finished just this last week or so. I earned the Platinum Trophy on PlayStation 4 for Final Fantasy 15. Now, I'm a long-standing Final Fantasy fan. I will say, though, that I'm a limited fan. Meaning to say that I kind of jumped on the bandwagon in the PlayStation 1 era. Understandable for me, because being 24 at this point, Final Fantasy VII was about the first game that came out while I was really aware enough to see it and know what it was. And in fact, I even played that late, so that's going to tell you something about, when I was getting into gaming. The PlayStation 1 was kind of the new kid on the block, right? That came out first. I believe Sony PlayStation did beat N64, I want to say, but Final Fantasy VII was my very first game. So when I'm talking about my reference to the Final Fantasy series, I've played a few of the older games before that, but really 7, 8, 9, 10, some 13, and in this game are just about all of my Final Fantasy experience. I played some Dirge of Cerberus. I've tooled around with the older ones, 1, 2, maybe 4. I think I played some 5. Not to any extensive level, except for maybe Final Fantasy 1. I think I have beaten that, but it's been quite some time. So all of my comparisons to the rest of the series, take that with a grain of salt, knowing that I've kind of been a real fan of PlayStation 1 era on. And that's kind of been where my experience comes from. So I'm going to start out not holding any punches back. What exactly is my opinion of the game? Largely, it's that Final Fantasy 15 to me is a mediocre entry into the franchise, and I'm just going to say that right off the bat. That's understanding full well that I put over 60 hours into this game. I took the care to platinum it, so obviously, I didn't hate the experience. I did enjoy myself quite a bit, but Square Enix took some direction in this entry that I really was just not a fan of. There are some things that I did enjoy, ultimately, but I'm going to kind of go into piece by piece. This will be kind of a disjointed reflection on the game. I don't have a very extensive notes set up for this, but this is just going to be my take on it and why I think the way that I do. So, starting off saying that it's mediocre, that's out of the way, let's jump into why. So, the first thing I'm going to do is kind of jump into what I did like about this game. I want to get that out of the way first, just to prove to you that I'm not just a big hater, right? I did enjoy the game. My personal rating would probably be to give it like maybe a 75 or an 80. Understanding that it's a Final Fantasy game, I'd give it that score. So here we go. In my opinion, the largest issue with Final Fantasy 15 is with the plot. There is a plot. I think that it's handled terribly. Now, Square Enix was trying out something new with this entry into the franchise. I understand what it was. I think their big advertisement was that it's a Final Fantasy game for like new and old players of the series. That's awesome. I get that. They were going to take a big risk. But ultimately what happened was the plot of the game, and I would also venture to say the characters, took an enormous backseat to the gameplay, right? They were really going for this Western RPG, explore the open world, see all the cool environments, have a road trip with a few interesting personas, and that went well. That went okay. There's an enormous amount of content to explore. It's one of the most beautiful open worlds I've ever seen. I believe that I saw a figure that the actual size of the world is something like 5 times the size of Skyrim. Even though Skyrim is one of the smaller entries, like that is a recent example, right? This is a massive, massive world. I would argue that it feels more limited than, say, Skyrim does, because most of your exploration of that is driving around in your car to get places. So maybe that doesn't make sense. To me, it did feel like I was very disconnected with the world I was in. Most of the exploration I took part in was going place to place from a completionist standpoint, trying to get all the different quests done, trying to get all the collectibles that I cared to get. I did grab the platinum. I did not go through and do all the elite dungeons. I did not really do everything there is to do in this game. I did beat Adamantoise. I did collect all of the 13 King's Arms. But ultimately, my problem with the story is that they really don't seem to care about it early on. And that's not to say that they don't, have things happen that are story-centric. They do. From the very beginning of the game, you very vaguely understand what's going on, but the problem is you understand it so vaguely that when the big things do happen, you just don't really understand why you should care. You don't understand what it means. And I think that was an enormous downside to the story design of this game. So let's just jump into how it starts out, right? So the game starts, you, Noctis, I say you, I guess you're a third-person character, so I can't really say you, but Noctis is just leaving Insomnia, where he's a prince. He is going out with his 3 friends, bodyguards basically, Gladiolus, Ignis, and Prompto. They're going on a road trip in this awesome car, the Regalia, I don't know exactly how you pronounce it. They're heading out to basically get Noctis hitched, right? And at the beginning of the game, you really have no idea why. Your father, King Regis, says something very vague to you. He says, walk tall, my son. Once you leave, you can't come back. Noctis being kind of his little emo self in the beginning of the game. Though I would argue for almost all the games, I don't think that Noctis has very much character at all, to be honest, but I want to pretend like he did by the end. That's all you really know. You're leaving your home, you're driving all the way across the world, you're going to get on this boat to go marry Lunafreya, you later learn as the Oracle. So here's the problem with this. You have no idea why this is all happening, you don't understand the context of that wedding, why it's happening, and you don't have any idea who Lunafreya is. You don't have any idea what an Oracle is, or the Oracle is, and what that means, why you should care about that. And there's a big reason why this is the case. I said earlier that Square Enix was trying for a whole new storytelling design arc where they were taking a multimedia approach to telling the story of this game. What this means is that, aside from the base game Final Fantasy XV, they also put a lot of the story into 2 other places primarily, one being the Brotherhood anime, which explores Noctis and how he met his 3 friends, and setting them up for what happens to Noctis' mother, how does he kind of get to where he is, them all growing up together. And that does kind of zero in on that, flesh out those characters some, which is really needed. And then the other is the Kingsglaive movie, which I have not seen yet, so understand that when I'm talking that. I've watched the anime, I have not seen the movie yet, and I severely plan, or very intently plan on doing so. But anyway, so you basically need to consume all 3, from what I understand, to really get what's going on in this story. If you pay really close attention in just the game, you can basically piece it together by the end, but it is definitely a struggle, and I think that's a real disservice to gamers who maybe only have played the game and are expecting more of that approach, because it's kind of difficult to... You basically have to do homework before you play to understand what's going on. So basically, here's what's going on with Insomnia, or the Kingdom of Lucius, which Noctis and his father and all of his friends belong to, is that they have been at war with the Empire, right? Very kind of classic sci-fi fantasy trope. There's an evil empire, right? And this empire has basically achieved world domination. They've conquered everywhere. The only kingdom left standing is the Kingdom of Lucius, which is harkening way back to the early days of Final Fantasy, Final Fantasy I especially, and moving on and so forth. There are these legendary crystals that are a source of magic and power and light, keeping the darkness at bay. Lucius is the only kingdom that still has one, therefore Lucius is able to kind of hold back the Empire and keep its autonomy, even though the rest of the world has all been cancelled, or conquered and destroyed. So they've been at war, basically at a standstill with the Empire, for quite some time. And what comes of this is that they've basically, through intense negotiations between Regis and the Emperor, or whoever it might be, it could have been Arden, I suppose, of the Empire, they have decided on a ceasefire. Basically, you don't get to conquer us, right? We're going to stay in the Kingdom of Lucius, but here's what we'll do. We will give you every single territory of our kingdom except for our capital city. You can have all of that, and we'll call it good, okay? Just take all of this, leave us with this little chunk here, which doesn't make sense for a lot of logical standpoints. That would not be sustainable. But, oh, and there's a caveat too. You have to let my son here, Noctis, you have to let him go marry the Oracle way across the world. That's part of it. That's okay. Do that, and you can have all the rest of Lucius. So, this is the context of what's happening. So you're leaving understanding that this is what's going down. They don't tell you this. You don't really understand. A ceasefire is kind of mentioned by Arden briefly at one point, but they don't understand what that means. They don't really understand how long you've been at war with the Empire. You don't understand the gravity of the fact that your home is basically all being given away to this empire that no one in the world likes. So let's approach this first from a logical standpoint. Let's look at it this way. So imagine that Insomnia, the capital of Lucius, is a castle, right? You have this big castle. It's sitting in the middle of the open plain. The king is there. All the markets are there. The commerce is there, etc. Great. Awesome. All the nobles, the seat of all the power in Lucius, which in the case of Lucius, it does seem like Insomnia is where all of that happens. The rest of the game world is very much this frontier feeling. There's not very big cities. There's not really much of a government. There's kind of all these little outposts across the rest of it. There's like one city of Bastalum, and that's really it. And that's not even very big to begin with. Insomnia is really it. So you might think that if that's the case, then Insomnia being on its own would work, right? That's where everything is anyway. That's all they really need. No, that's not true, okay? When you have this castle in the middle of the plains, they have all their hoards of food and stuff, their money, their power, their military, their nobles, etc. They still need the rest of it to function, right? One, they need farmland. They need to have places to get all of this food from, to get their water from. They need to have people to tax. They need to have room to expand. If you cut them off this little tiny city, then just like a castle that is being sieged in a medieval time, they're going to run out of all this stuff. And they don't have any way to get it on their own because they're just landlocked. They don't have any space to do that. So, first and foremost, giving all their land away like that is just a death sentence, right? They're giving away all of the population of their kingdom almost, or a great deal of it, and all of their ability to sustain themselves. They're just giving it away to the Empire, right? You could argue that, well, Regis kind of understood that he's going to lose anyway. The Empire will not honor the agreement. They're going to come conquer you anyway. But you kind of get the impression that Regis was making a gambit trying to put Noctis and Lunafreya together. But even still, it doesn't really understand, or it doesn't really make sense. So, that brings me to the second problem I have with it, is with Lunafreya and Noctis. So as you come to understand throughout the game, there is this very long-standing relationship between the King of Lucius and the current Oracle, which the Oracle basically is a figure, I think it's always a female, I don't know if that's expressly said, you get the impression that it's always a female. And she is kind of the sole person who can communicate with the gods. The game calls them the Six, who are basically 6 classic Final Fantasy summons. I believe Ifrit, Shiva, Ramu, Bahamut, and what's the last one? Leviathan, I believe. Are who's the 6th? That's only 5, right? I don't even remember who the 6th is. But anyway, there are 6 classic summons. Oh, that's gonna bother me. Titan is the 6th one. Titan. Okay. All 6 of the summons, they're basically the gods of the world. And the Oracle can actually communicate with them and kind of acts as an intermediary, kind of buffs and works with the King of Lucius to defend the world from darkness, restore the light when that needs to happen, etc. They're the dream team. So the gambit that King Regis, I think, has is that, oh, well, I know. The world is about to go to complete shit, basically, right? The Empire, you've agreed to the ceasefire, they're going to attack anyway. in my wisdom as king, I know that this is going to happen. I'm going to fall. The city is going to fall. I need to get my son Noctis out of the city. I need to get him together with the Oracle so that when bad things happen, they're together to go handle this, right? And you also find out that basically the road trip that Noctis is going on is also kind of partaken of by his father when he was a youth as well, right? This whole idea of going across the kingdom of Lucius, collecting all of the different, not even Lucius, because some of the arms I think you get outside of that kingdom, but the 13 armiger, or the 13 king's arms, which apparently contain the power of past kings, give the king of Lucius his power. You basically go on this road trip to obtain all of these that will give you the power to restore the light, protect the crystal, etc., right? So Regis thinks, oh, I'm going to send off my son to go start this trip. He'll have the Oracle, he'll have his three friends, Prompto, Ignis, and Gladio, and that's the best we can hope for. It's up to them at that point. So firstly, that's not really a bad plan. I think that works well in a story perspective. I just don't think that that's communicated to the player in a clear way that makes them really understand and care. So when the game starts, you're basically pushing your car through the wasteland. You're about 20 steps outside of your city when your car breaks down. Instead of going back to fix it, you have to just push it forward, who knows how many miles. You go to Hammerhead to get it repaired, and the game just kind of starts, right? You're in the middle of nowhere. For some reason, you're the prince, you have no money, and you just start in this free world roaming mechanic. Very reminiscent of, say, Red Dead Redemption, The Elder Scrolls, Grand Theft Auto especially, kind of just going from place to place, completing objectives for different NPCs that you meet as you make your way across the world to your story. You're basically just dropped in a sandbox at the beginning. And I hated this. I hated it. It actually took me a few hours into the game, and I had to take a break for a week or two and then try again. Because there is nothing to ground me in the game. And some people love this. Like, this was the idea of the original Legend of Zelda, right? Which I believe the game director said was a massive inspiration for why FF15 was designed the way that it was that, okay, the player is fueled by exploration, the sense of adventure. And that is in the game. That's a strong point of the game that I enjoy. I just don't think that Final Fantasy, for me, has ever been about that. I think that Final Fantasy has largely been about, first and foremost, the story is very important. The music's always been a really strong point, but the story, the setting is very important as well. The combat system, I think, is also very important. And that sense of exploration really takes a back seat to that. And so what it kind of reminded me of when I was playing FF15 was playing an MMO game, right? Like I'm playing World of Warcraft, or maybe even some kind of more basic idea, just much more grindy, basic MMO game. You could argue WoW is that now, but just doing fetch quests over and over and over and over again, right? Go to this new area, do all the hunts, do all of the mini-games, all the quests, move to the next area, do all the quests, do all the mini-games, do all the things. It has that hub-to-hub-to-hub MMO feel. And as someone in particular who's very tired of MMOs at this point, I really did not enjoy this. It definitely has a very addictive feel to it. That whole completionist feel is very strong. If you are a completionist, you will enjoy this game. There's a lot to do. But it's not very diverse. In fact, there's hardly any diversity at all, which is one of my big issues with the game. So back to the story, I got kind of sidetracked. Back to the explanation of my dislike for the story. You're told nothing being dropped in. You just kind of start. And you kind of bump around and do whatever you want to do in this little chunk of the world that gives you at the beginning of the game, until you make your way to Golden Key, I believe, which where you're going to get a boat to go to it Altitia? Or is it Tannenbrau? Bomb? Brew? You're going to go get Luna Freya. You gotta take the boat to get there. You show up, you're gonna go in the morning. Great. You get this very vague, small cutscene of Insomnia being invaded and taken over, King Regis being killed, and then in the morning you see a newspaper, oh, Insomnia has fallen. Everyone is distraught. They're upset. Noctis decides, okay, we're going to go back to the city. We're going to go and see what can be done. See for ourselves. Do whatever we can. That makes sense. But the problem is, as the player, you have no reason to care. You don't really understand what Insomnia is. You've only briefly seen it in a tiny cutscene where really you're just looking at the throne room and the steps outside. That's really it. You're so disconnected from being attached to the kingdom, being attached to your father, that when you get this news that it's fallen, the characters are all like, oh no, it's fallen, this is terrible. You as the player just look at the characters and go, well, they're upset about it, but I really don't care. Let me compare this to, I think, a game that did it right. It's in the same series, Final Fantasy IX, which is my personal favorite game. There's the massive city of Lindblum, I believe is the title, yeah. So Lindblum is kind of the world's master city. It's in fact an entire city inside this enormous castle. All of these different layers, tons of advanced technology, a metropolis, right? Like the largest city in the entire game. Basically is policing the world, keeping Alexandria in line. And you journey there, you arrive maybe a 10th to a 5th through the game. Somewhere in that, very early on. You get to Lindblum, you're still at low levels, you don't understand a lot about the world, but you get to this wonderful city of Lindblum. You have all these great adventures there, you partake in the Festival of the Hunt, I believe is what it's called. All of these great mini-games, there's tons of great gear, really cool explorations, you see all the different party members go around the city and make their own sense of it, right? Vivi, you see him exploring like a grocery store, learning about the hunt and going, oh, this looks like fun. Zidane is, of course, hanging out at a bar, flirting with a waitress. He meets Freya. Steiner is looking at armor, I think, and becomes really attached to the really gross-smelling pickles they have. Dagger is up on top, wistfully looking across the landscape on a telescope back to her home in Alexandria. They're all making the city their own. The city has an enormous amount of character. It's this great shining jewel in the world of Gaia. And so later on in the game, when King Braun, or Brane, I forget how you pronounce it, when she attacks it with the summons that Kuja has given her, and you see it all destroyed by monsters, and then you go into the city, you explore it afterwards, and see all the wreckage and all the displaced townsfolk and the victims and just the carnage. It's hard to deal with that. Because on Disc 1, when you were first exploring it, you really became attached to this place. It became this really bright, shining part of the world. But when that goes away, you feel like something has been taken away from you as the player. You're upset about it. But in Final Fantasy 15, you basically just get that second part, only you don't even get to go home. When you go back to Insomnia to do something, you park outside the city and kind of look at it from a distance, see the smoke, and go, oh no, this is bad. And you get a phone call that pulls you away again. So you already don't get that first part of caring. You have no grounded nature with the city. But on top of that, you don't get to see the aftermath until the very end of the game. And yet, they still want you to care, and I as a gamer just really didn't care. That was my problem, that I didn't care about the plot until the very end, and even then just barely, because I didn't get any of that setup to care about it. which was, I think, an enormous disaster. And largely that goes into the storytelling manner that the game has. And one of the problems is that the first 80% of the game, the story doesn't really matter. You're just kind of exploring, going from place to place to place. You always have kind of a main quest mission going on, but the problem is if you want to just do the main story, it'll slingshot you through the game in like just a few hours. Like I bet that you could easily beat it between 5 and 10 hours. The speedrun might actually be 8 hours, but I'm not sure about that. It could be less. But the actual story of the game just blasts you through. It's really quick, and it presents an interesting problem, firstly, that I also found in The Witcher 3. Though it's a bigger problem in this game for a number of reasons. So in The Witcher 3, another game that I love, it also has a ton of bonus content. Different quests to do, places to explore, gear to collect, abilities to earn and gain. So that just sounds wonderful, right? But there is a downside. Because if you take the time to do all the extra Witcher contracts in that game, do all the side quests, get all the gear, collect all the Witcher gear you want, upgrade it, level up your abilities, if you do all of that stuff that you want to, your power level will be way up here. But what you actually need to beat the game will be way down here, right? Because when they're designing the game, they don't expect the player to go do everything before they beat it. Because most players just won't do that. They'll just do a little bit, and then they'll beat the game, and then they'll set it down and be done. Maybe they'll go back later and they'll do it. But if you're a really hardcore gamer in these kinds of things, you want to really do everything, see everything, set yourself up the best way you can, I tend to really want to min-max and get my characters into a really powerful place before I go. So for me, having all these options and things to explore, I want to do them. I want to do them before I move on. I want to do everything in this zone before I move into the next zone, and then into the next zone. I don't want to leave anything behind, because if you do that, then, well, firstly, when you leave it and you want to go back, it'll all be under-leveled anyway. There will no longer be any point to doing it, so you might as well do it then before it is completely not worth your time. So you do everything, then the main story is really easy and not difficult at all, and that definitely happened in this to an even greater extent. By the time I beat the game, I want to say my characters were level mid-70s, maybe level 80. And I think the recommended level to beat the game is 45. Now, let's add another caveat to that, and that is that the combat in Final Fantasy 15 is extremely straightforward and easy. It's extremely easy. I think it gets the criticism a lot that you can just hold down the circle button and win most fights, and that's probably true. Especially if you don't do any of the bonus content. In fact, the final boss fight with Arden is mainly just holding down the circle button while he does the same thing to you. So it doesn't have the complexity that The Witcher 3 had in that regard. So that level difference, it's changed because in Final Fantasy 15 it's mainly just on your stats. Your stats get huge because your gear is good, your level is high, your abilities are up there, and then the combat, which is already just holding down the circle button, completely makes those endgame fights anticlimactic, which they were. You're in no danger of losing because of how powerful you are, because you did this stuff, and it didn't care about pacing that with the story. So they slingshot you through the story at the end of the game. Basically, you kind of move along slowly in the story until you go to Altissia to meet Lunafreya. And then immediately, you don't even ever get to meet her and talk to her, like ever in the entire game. You get some flashbacks when you were a kid of vague communication with her, but all of a sudden you show up in Altissia, you meet Lunafreya, and it seems that Noctis and her really care about each other. But you, as the gamer, have no reason to care about this, because you haven't seen why they should. Back to Final Fantasy IX, you get to see when Zidane and Dagger, or Princess Garnet, meet and flirt and fall in love, and there's that connection. And I think that FF9 is one of the best love stories in the series because of this. And in FF15, you're just kind of supposed to care, right? He sees her across the waterway when Leviathan is causing trouble, and they seem to care about each other. And I, as the gamer, am just wondering, why? I see the tears. I don't get the tears, right? You're telling me I care. You haven't earned it yet. You haven't sucked me in yet. So when she dies, when she's killed by Arden, yes, that's shocking, but that's the game's first real attempt to make you care about it, and it's also the last time you see her. So there's no gravity, really. There's no sense of real loss. Not really, not in my mind, not compared to what they could have done, which would have been introducing her into the story sooner, making it have a longer campaign. This has to be the shortest story of any Final Fantasy game I've ever played in my life. It's extremely short, it's extremely straightforward, and it's extremely lackluster. And you basically, it's after this point that you kind of begin to understand what Arden is trying to do. It's not until this point where you kind of figure out he's the bad guy. Which, basically, what you find out later in the game is that he is this ancient Lucian king, basically, who's going to be the king. When the world was ravaged by a demonic plague, a disease that turned people into demons, he stepped up on the pedestal, became the hero, sucked up all the demonic power to save the world, but then was deemed too demonic to become the king himself. So now, branded an immortal because of his absorption of the demon power, he's held this grudge for the last 3,000 years, however long it was, and is now finally ready to take it out on the Kingdom of Lucius. But you don't learn this until the very end. There's no development. And that's really my problem with the whole game, is that I feel like the story was good, but by the time you got me caring about it, it was over. There wasn't any of that caring about it in the middle, or in the beginning. That was all just explore the world, have gameplay, story at the end. And that was really incredibly just disappointing for me as a long-standing Final Fantasy fan. I did not enjoy that. I wanted more. I'm a very story-focused gamer, so not having that in a Final Fantasy title was extremely upsetting. It just was disappointing. And largely, I know they were trying for something new in this game, but it doesn't really feel like Final Fantasy to me. It has some Final Fantasy paint, I would say. It has great references, jokes harkening back, the chocobos are awesome, you see the summons, but ultimately, if it didn't have the Final Fantasy title, it wouldn't remind me of a Final Fantasy game. If they changed the words, they changed the title, I wouldn't know the difference. It would just be a JRPG. Now, the game looks wonderful. The graphics are incredible. I saw some figure that just the hair count, or just, like the pixel count in Noxus's hair is like off the charts. It's like so much higher than anything else that's been done. That's awesome. It does look beautiful. The world looks beautiful. Driving around in the regalia doing quests is different, but it's fun. Ultimately, the combat was just way too simple. The story was way too vague and not fleshed out. The characters, all four of the main characters have a very shallow level of interest. How they interact, the personalities that they have, works. It's neat. The way that they help each other in combat is awesome. When you really get them all using their abilities, that's pretty fun. There's not a lot of depth there even still, but there's no real further exploration of their characters. Now, this has gone through more in the Brotherhood anime, but you get no character development on Ignis, Gladiolus, or Prompto. And it seems like for Noctis, they give him all of his development right at the end. And ultimately, right before he dies, spoiler alert, it's a pretty night and day difference. Basically, after Altitia, for some reason, Gladiolus is really mad at Noctis because he's too upset about things. Mainly because Ignis has just lost his eyesight, and Gladiolus is like, hey, care about Ignis, we're right in front of you, we're hurting too. But Noctis has not only lost his father and the kingdom that he was a prince of, he's just lost apparently his long-lost love and his bride-to-be, and everything that's hopeless. In my opinion, Noctis has a reason to be upset. Like, he's also sad for Ignis, but that whole Gladiolus being mad at him didn't make sense to me. It seemed a little bit ridiculous. Boy, I don't know. It just didn't work for me. I think that the segments at the end of the story game where they split up the party, I get that there are different points in the game where the DLC, like episode Gladiolus, episode Prompto, Ignis, Arden's going to get one. We're going to flesh out what these characters are doing when they're not with the main party, but I hated the party splitting up. I thought that Noctis losing his weapon and having to use the ring of Lushi, or Lushi, how you pronounced it, and then his father's sword was really not entertaining, because I felt like I spent the entire game building up my party dynamic, collecting the gear, and then when the game is giving me more difficult, grander combat, you're in the capital of the Empire, they take all that away and just give you this little ring. Now you have to hide from enemies and walk through 100 rooms that look the same, alone, without any of those cool dynamics, and that was just not fun for me. And it wasn't even like you were exploring anything fun. You were just walking through all these big empty rooms. Huge misstep. Yeah, I don't know. The story just was really disappointing for me. The execution was extremely disappointing. It just doesn't... It's just a mediocre Final Fantasy game. I would say that, in my opinion, it is my least favorite of the ones I finished. Those ones that I mentioned. This is in last place. Definitely. Now, here's a big thing that they could have done to improve it. And I mentioned briefly earlier that it reminds me in many ways of Final Fantasy, or not Final Fantasy. It reminds me of Grand Theft Auto in multiple ways. That open world feels very Grand Theft Auto. Meeting up with different characters to do quests on an ongoing level is a big GTA thing, but GTA does it better. And there's a big reason why GTA does it better. And they do it this way, and are able to maintain this great moving story and moving characters. There's that whole GTA mechanic where around the world you basically get a letter representing the character's name, right? In GTA 4, which is my favorite, you'll have Roman, who is Nico's cousin. You interact with him all the time. And there'll be this R on the map. When you see that, you know, okay, Roman's got a quest for me. What's going on with Roman? I'm going to go see what's up with him. So you go check him out, and you get this, 2 to however long minute cutscene, basically, of them talking and interacting, talking about what has been going on with them, why you're there. You get a lot of really great character piece and insight and build-up there, and that sucks you in, teaches you about characters, gives them a chance to develop and grow, and showcase why they are the way that they are, and then you do the little mission and you go on. And Final Fantasy 15 didn't have this at all. All of the side quests are extremely, extremely shallow. You go up to talk to the guy, and he's like, "Oh, listen, this Chocobo's hurt. He's out in the woods over there. Why don't you go give him a potion?" And that's legitimately how most of the side quests are. They're just like, "Hi, I'm a scientist, and I'd like to collect frogs. Will you go check that out for me? Thanks, here's some money." It's got that MMO shallow feel. I hate it. They're all fetch quests. Like, the entire game is just fetch quests. Or kill this quests. And that's so incredibly disappointing. And if they'd gone more with that Witcher feel, more with that Grand Theft Auto feel, of having that area to area, here's this little story showcase, go to the next area, get another, then they could have really paced out the story, and would you care about the characters, and understand the characters, and have character growth. And they didn't do this. You just have the gameplay in the first 80% of the game, and at the end of the story they want to say, now look how it mattered. But it didn't in my mind. So, did I enjoy the game? Sure, I definitely did. I would give it a 75 to an 80, probably out of 100. It's a mediocre Final Fantasy game, but there's a lot of gold here that is worth checking out. And if you are a completionist, if you enjoy the exploration, if you enjoy just that feeling of walking around in a fantasy world, increasing your power level, this is a great game for you. It plays like an MMO that is single player. And I think that's the best way to describe it, which I was not super into. And I don't think that I'm going to play this game again. Will I play the DLC? Probably. But this game, I really don't see it having the staying power that some of the classics did. And that's a bit of a bummer. Like, I think I would go back and I would play Final Fantasy 13 again over this any day of the week. And that might be a very radical opinion, but in my view, Final Fantasy 15 is about the antithesis of Final Fantasy 13. In 13, you really have this enormous linear storytelling where you have the plot in a straight line, and you go zone to zone to zone to zone, following the plot, and the game is over. And rather than a straight line, FF15 is a blob with the story point right here, and all the story is here at this point in the game. It's all here. And you drive around and around and around and around and around and around and around, and oh, there it is, game's over. And I vastly prefer that linear style. Both of them don't super feel like Final Fantasy, but as a story-focused gamer, 13 did it way better than 15 did, and that's just how I feel about it. So I'm sorry that this is a very long video. I had no idea going into this how long it would be. In the future, I'll probably have some notes that are a lot more exact than these ones are. So yeah, I hope that this wasn't just a whole lot of annoying opinions that you don't care about. This is just rambling, but I really enjoy doing this. I think I'm going to do them in the future, kind of as I play through games. Again, I'd like to kind of post reflections of that. There's a YouTuber I've really been enjoying lately. I think his name is Lore Runner, who he calls them ruminations videos, where he really goes in depth and picks apart the games he's played. He generally loves them when he's making a video about them, and I've really enjoyed that lately, the level of depth he puts into it, and that's definitely what has inspired this. So give him a look if you'd like. I'll try to put a link in the description. His channel name is Lore Runner. Fantastic guy, genius opinions about game design choices. And yeah, so I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you next time. Bye.